So, a big warm welcome to everyone to the first episode of the first series of Entangled Discussions. Gives me great delight to start off with a good friend of mine, Chris Bishop, and his talk regarding you don't have to be a particle physicist to be in quantum, giving guidelines on how to future-proof your career and the breadth of opportunities available, along with some other interesting tidbits, as always, with Chris. So to give you a brief whistle-stop rundown on Chris, so he's a TEDx speaker, he's a moderator at IQT. He's runs improvising careers. He's a musician, a raconteur, general good guy. And I'll introduce Chris more formally in just a moment. But to give a guideline of what to expect from Entangled Discussions. So Entangled Discussions is basically a way for myself, my company, Entangled Positions, to give something back to the quantum community that we work in and amongst. Over the years, I've been fortunate enough to meet thousands of fascinating people who've all got something interesting to say and also are interested to hear from other people within the community. So this is a vehicle for that. So welcome to everyone that's joined us live. And if you're watching the video afterwards, welcome digitally. So as I said, I gave you a brief introduction to Chris, but he's basically a career chameleon. So I'd rather pass over and Chris can give you a more definitive view, because with the best will in the world, I could write a page of notes and I still wouldn't have it all down. So Chris, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you, John. I'm delighted to be here. So just to frame the conversation, I describe myself as a nonlinear multimodal careerist. So by that, I mean, I've had 8 careers so far since graduating with a degree in German literature, of all things, from a small liberal arts school in Vermont. By the way, I'm in Connecticut, about an hour and change northeast of New York, kind of in the commuter woodburbs, we kind of call it out here. Used to take the train into New York every day. I did that for 8 years, schlepping into Midtown or downtown or whatever. Several careers in New York City. I lived in Manhattan for 16 years, but the theme sort of for this conversation is around one of my sort of key sort of tactics or worldviews, if you will. I could describe it in sort of 3 phrases: chase the maelstrom, find the chaos, go for the mayhem. So by that, I mean, go where the royal they, meaning existing business models, don't exist yet, or where they're morphing and emerging, right? Because then you can contribute, you can be creative, you can ideally be employed, be remunerated, right? Get compensated, but do something that's unique, that's interesting, that's maybe on the fringe now, but that eventually will come to the center. So again, that's the theme. That's why sort of how John and I met, because in my ongoing quest for what's the next crazy thing that's going to be impacting business and society and culture, quantum appeared. Just to, again, to frame it in terms of my own career, I, again, was touring with this band for 3 years, did 3 albums with them, moved to New York, became a session musician, bought a Steinberger bass, which is a carbon graphite instrument, the first one designed by this, actually a furniture designer, industrial designer. I was running a synclavier in New York at a jingle house in the 80s. That was the state-of-the-art digital musical instrument at the time. So connecting music and data, I always contend that in 1985 in New York, music became data. So I bought a Mac Plus and had to figure out how to deal with composing and sequencing and sampling using a computer. I then saw this wacky thing called the World Wide Web emerging in the early 90s and said, well, that's going to be an interesting tool that people will use. So I taught myself to be a web producer, left the jingle business, worked at a couple of seminal interactive agencies in New York, and then much to my surprise was hired by IBM, of all companies, into corporate internet programs. And I spent 15 years at IBM doing a variety of things. Strategy for sure, because as these execs with P&Ls realized they could sell stuff and service customers and clients and interact with supply chain and business partners and journalists and analysts with this web thing, me and other members of the team were pulled into these conversations about how do we drive business strategy using this World Wide Web tool. Um, I left IBM. I e-tired in big blue parlance about 8 years ago, and worked for a while at a company called Future Workplace, an HR consulting firm in New York, and then went out on my own as a freelance writer and speaker. Did my TEDx talk in New York because my real passion is um, younger people, right? So, with all due respect to HR execs, and I respect them for sure, my interest is in helping specifically like Gen Z learners and early to mid career millennials. Not to say I haven't done I do a workshop, by the way, at universities called How to Succeed at Jobs That Don't Exist Yet. And it's based on how I navigated these 8 careers. In fact, I have a course on LinkedIn Learning called Future Proofing Your Data Science Career. And the core of it is this toolkit, but it's discipline and vertical agnostic. So it works no matter what kind of interest you have, or talent, or proclivities, or expertise. So that sort of brings me to John. And as John said, I've been working as the master of ceremonies for an event called Inside Quantum Technology, and we're doing it again in May. So I encourage you all to sign up and check that out if you're interested. In fact, John and I are going to do a panel with a couple of other people talking about preparing the quantum workforce. So that's sort of the long-winded intro, but that is just for context for our conversation today.
And just as a slight plug, actually, the panel at Inside Quantum Technology is also being shared quite a lot by Entangled Discussions as well. So the topics will be different, but you'll see a lot of familiar faces. And obviously, as Chris mentioned, that's kind of how we came across each other. And yeah, we certainly always have interesting conversations, and I think the themes that we discuss, at least from one side of the conversation, deserve a wider audience.
Yeah.
So obviously, you've got a broad range of interests, Chris. So in terms of moving, sort of quantum, and it's quite a broad playing field, but how do you see that compared to something like the web, when you was involved with the web in the early days?
Well, so I think again, sort of the meta message around quantum workforce, right, is that technology has been disrupting and creating business models for literally hundreds of years, right? So people think, obviously, quantum is a net new technology, comparatively new, although it's been around to varying degrees. I mean, since Einstein was dissuaded and marginalized by the quantum mechanics people, right, back in the day. Um, but the idea is there's a consistent pattern around technology appearing and there being some kind of disruptive impact, right? And then sort of a standardization and or adoption. Sidebar is there's a great book by a Venezuelan economist, a woman named Carlota Perez. She teaches at Cambridge. She has some videos on YouTube. The book is called Technological Revolutions in Financial Capital. So any of you economics geeks who are interested in that kind of perspective, she breaks the past 350 years into 5 cycles of innovation, crash, and adoption, if you will. Fascinating. And she starts with um, automated knitting machines, right? The Industrial Revolution, which, where the Luddites were up in arms and destroying manufacturing equipment because they felt like it was stealing jobs from people that had skills that were not transferable. So, I mean, that's, early 1800s, right? Really started in the mid 18th century. And she talks about the age of information where we are today. But railroads, for example, is a great example of a disruptive technology that changed models, and people had to think about lots of different um, impacts, right? So railroads, so George Stephenson creates the rocket in England in like 1812 or something. And people are like, well, what are we going to do with this? Are we going to move people or goods or livestock, or are we going to build stations in every town or just major cities? And down to technical discussions like, what should the rail gauge be? How far apart should they be? How long should the cars be? How are we going to fuel these things? Are we going to set up stations to provide water and coal? And how often? What's the technology require? So, needless to say, they came to agreement around, okay, well, we'll build stations where there's opportunity again to drive a business model. So certainly, if moving livestock generates attributable revenue, we want to do that. We want to put train stations out in rural areas and put corn and wheat and whatever on the trains and bring them to urban settings. Right, the track should really be this wide. The grade that they can deal with should be this. So standardization drove adoption and ultimately, society and cultural and business benefit. So think of that in terms of quantum, right? So there are lots of different models for qubits. Are we going to use trapped ion or superconducting or topological, or there are lots of different approaches, and they may all serve different functions, but now it's a bit of a wild west, right? It's a bit of a frontier mentality, which is exciting actually. Back to Chase the Maelstrom. There are lots of companies, large and small, that are pursuing these kinds of questions, trying to answer them. And the other thing I would say, and I have some charts I could share, but the idea is that, the title of this conversation is around, we don't have to be a particle physicist to work in quantum. So you didn't have to be an engineer to work in the railroads, right? Another example I love to cite. So this is me droning on. This is my economic historian coming out, channeling my economic historian. I think of Henry Ford. And the model for this is like, for me being a bass player in New York in the 80s, when music became data, my value proposition changed dramatically. So 100 years ago, 1908, Henry Ford's cranking out Model Ts on the assembly line in Detroit. And the message to farriers and blacksmiths was, you guys have a great skill, but we don't really need many people who know how to do that anymore. So thanks for stopping by. You better figure out what are you going to do now. So the smart blacksmiths figured out, or carriage makers, for example, knew how to make carriages, but they had to figure out how to deal with internal combustion engines. So the smart ones put those two technologies together. Again, the meta sidebar comparison is, you're going to be able to, the audience, people interested in quantum, are going to have skills that exist today that are transferable, and a delta, a gap, white space, where you're going to figure out, what is the skill I need to know how to do to be successful in this new technology, right? And that has been going on again for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, right? I mean, I could go back to the Stone Age, right? So when we were all hunters and gatherers, there was some guy who had a good arm and could throw the spear and kill the woolly mammoth. And there was someone who knew how to prepare the meat, and someone who knew how to drag it back to the cave, and somebody knew how to dress the fur and make garments out of it. And I mean, so, division of labor. I go back to Plato even, but that's a little esoteric. But in the Republic, he describes those kinds of skills. Everyone has a certain skill or proclivity, right? So back to Henry Ford, farriers maybe opened like a roadside attraction or a car wash or a garage, or a motel or a roadside restaurant. They took skills that they had dealing with people, interacting, and transferred it to this new model. So the same thing went on with the web, the World Wide Web. When I was, building websites, it was like, well, I know how to run a team from being in the jingle biz, writing music for radio and TV commercials, right? Where you have the players or actors might be a guitar player, a singer, a copyist, a recording engineer, right? But at the end of the day, you had a budget, a client, and a deliverable, right? So I took those skills and moved them to the web. I learned about HTML and graphic design and copywriting, and stayed up late surfing the web looking at source code. How do they put this together? And then hung out a shingle and became a web producer, because actors in the web space were, maybe like a copywriter, a graphic designer, a coder, a scripter. But at the end of the day, there's a client and a budget and deliverable. And that's going to be true in the quantum business for sure, right? So lots of different skills, but think about transferable skills. Think about what you know how to do and what you need to learn how to do, and go learn it. And then you can be successful in this new model.
Chris, just obviously there's a lot of travel we can look around the different landscape, but just before we move on and sort of open that Pandora's box up, obviously it's clear why quantum was a natural home for someone like yourself with your interests and background. Um, but what first triggered that?
Well, again, I've always been intrigued by new stuff, right? And I don't know why, it's just sort of how I'm wired. But always looking for like the next new thing. And I'd say I've always been a nerd. Even though I made a 35-year detour into music, and there was some nerd aspects of that. I mean, again, running a synclavier and dealing with a carbon graphite electric bass and getting into the web. But I'm always fascinated by what's coming, what's next, what's new. Always curious about where stuff is going. So that's kind of been a motivating factor for me for all of my 8 careers in the 45 years since I've been in the workplace writ large, if you will. So, and it's been fun. It's been interesting. It's kept me, and with all lack of modesty, I've been successful in these 8 careers. There were definitely moments, though, where it was challenging, where I, hit a wall where I really didn't know something I needed to know how to do, and had to figure it out. Um, I mean, I'll recount this story about being in New York. So I moved to New York, pompous ass that I was, thinking, well, I can run with the big dogs. Let me see. I mean, it's New York. I mean, there's only the best musicians on the planet living, on this 13-mile island. I'm sure I can play with them. So early memory is going to a session, right? So a jam session with this Japanese jazz guitar player, and he wanted to play bebop tunes. And I had never played bebop tunes. I didn't know what that was really. I mean, I played some free jazz and played classical music. Actually, I was in an orchestra in college and played in rock bands. But bebop is a very different kind of thing, right? It's very complicated harmonically. There's certain scales, ways to play over these chords. They take jazz standards like show tunes, and then they sort of rethink them, recast them, put new melodies over kind of standard changes. So anyway, he goes, well, what tune do you want to play? I'm like, well, what do you mean? So, well, here's a fake book. So a fake book is a collection of printed out lead sheets of jazz tunes. He goes, well, let's play All the Things You Are. I'm like, what is that? I don't know what that is. Well, that's a standard. It's like a Cole Porter tune or something. Um, and I'm like, okay. So I kind of faked my way through it. It was embarrassing, to be honest. So then the next day, here's the killer. I'm at another jam session with some guys that I kind of knew and some I didn't know. And the guitar player turns to the sax player and goes, hey, Matsuo, I had a session yesterday with some bass player who didn't know any tunes. Do you believe that? I'm like, that was me. I was that bass player who didn't know any tunes. He's like, oh, okay. Well, looks like you got your work cut out for you, son. So I contacted a friend from college and said, Randy, I need to know how to play bebop tunes, man. I'm in New York, and that's part of the lingua franca. You've got to be ready to improvise over changes when they put a lead sheet in front of you. So I spent many hours with him, and he showed me, crack the code. Here's how it works. These are the tunes. You've got to learn these 100 tunes. You've got to learn these scales. You've got to, the best way to do it is have jam sessions and just do it and do it over and over till you get it. So that's a model that works in every, genre, if you will, every vertical, every discipline. So I'm thinking of if you have skills, sort of, for example, in technology writing, and you want to work in quantum, do some research on quantum. What's the delta? What do you need to know to write about quantum? So that's a model, no matter what your background or skills are.
And I think one of the things in and around that is the quantum community at the moment. It's so welcoming, giving, and people want to help each other. People want to offer advice. People want to go the extra mile and pay it forward, as they say. Um, the I think that the big thing is as Chris did, not to try and pretend, to know where your limits are, know what you know, what you don't know. I think it's far better that, and be open and learn from people, because people are willing, especially at the moment. It's almost pre-competition in certain areas. I think that's the way forward, because there's a lot of people that There's a few people that are, but a lot of people that will be trying to proclaim expertise when they've been in and around the quantum space for a year or two, and they'll claim that they're an expert in this, that, and the other. Focus on what you are an expert in or what you do well, and supplement the other things. I think that's something that's really important. And no one knows everything. This topic is so big. Nobody knows everything. If you try and go down that route, you're soon going to get found out that you can't answer all the questions. So be proud of what you do know and what you can bring to things, and look at how that can complement people, because a lot of the people that have been in the trade for a long time. There's gaps in their knowledge. Whether it's on the business side, whether you look at the people working in manufacturing the lasers, for example. Well, their simulation and theory may not be as good as people that have been working in that side of things, or the marketing people. That come in, that they need to understand that quantum, or recruitment indeed, you need to understand that quantum is very different to other sectors, other industries, other technologies. But there are some similarities that you can feed on. And when I first came into recruitment, if I pretended I was an expert in the first 2 or 3 years, I don't think I'd be sitting where I am right now. That's for sure. And I was quite fortunate that at the time I was able to work with companies that were pre-funding. So I had agreements where they would pay me if they got their funding in. So that took some of the pressure off. And a lot of these things I never got paid for. It was a good learning curve, but it didn't earn me a lot. It didn't earn me money, but I got to cut my teeth. And I wasn't telling people I was an expert when I wasn't, because at the time there were no quantum specialists. It just wasn't a thing. There was laser specialists, there was semiconductor specialists, software specialists, but no one was focusing on quantum purely. So, finding out what you do, what you can bring, and how that evolves. Look. One of the things I hear so often from CEOs and hiring managers is, what the people they're interviewing, what's that person interested in? What do they want to do? Because there's almost some sort of application in almost anything you can think of. Quantum fits into that in some way, whether you like ecology, whether you like finance, whether you like science, military, space. There's almost always something it can be applied to. So have a think about what's of interest to you and how that works with quantum, and you'll see that gradually that will get more and more recognition, and you'll be surprised how much people want to know about you and the person behind you, not just the skills you can bring. Is that everything comes as a package.
Yeah. Hey, John, can you give me screen sharing? I have this simple chart I want to put up. I think also in the context of that, it's also always good to keep big picture perspective, right? So I think of quantum in the same context as in terms of innovative technologies that have transformed business and culture, as the web, as we were saying, right? So when I got into the web biz, I built my first website in 1995. People were like, what is this web thing? Are we going to use it for business, or are we just going to click through HTML links and down the rabbit hole for hours and hours? Or people going to sell stuff with this web thing? Or I was a member of an organization in New York called the World Wide Web Artists Consortium. It was run by the two guys who founded agency.com, which was the first sort of interactive agency in the world. They were in New York. One was a former playwright. One was another, a account exec at a general advertising agency. They went on to become a multi-billion-dollar company. But they used to run these monthly meetings in this really cool big conference room on top of the Sony building at 56 in Madison. And they'd have sort of a vendor come in, kick off the meeting, and then people would get up and talk about what they're doing with the web, right? I remember some guy standing up and saying, "Well, I'm a physicist, but I'm gonna register physics.com and start a site that'll do blah blah blah." Someone else said, "Well, I'm a chef. I've got a couple of restaurants in New York, but I'm gonna register cooks.com, and we'll put up recipes and information on sourcing and blah blah blah." Because people are like, "Well, I guess we're gonna use it for something. Nobody's really sure what we're gonna do." But so that's a model again that applies to quantum. So the web, I think of it with social media, same kind of thing. What's this social thing going to do? Way before Facebook or early days of Facebook. I think of mobile, right? So everything is mobile now. So we do it all on our phones. That's a transformative technology that nobody really quite knew. I mean, they're not really even phones anymore. They kind of are, but they're, you know, high-powered computers that you carry around in your pocket. And I think quantum again is in that lineage, right? It's in that that heritage, if you will. So,
And
so John, you give me. Can I
you're
share
in,
my
you're
screen?
in.
All right, cool. So I have this very simple chart I put together, but I think it's again germane to this conversation. To give you a sec, can you see my screen? I'm going to go to slideshow mode. See, yeah, can you see that? Is it coming up? Yeah. So again, this is kind of the ecosystem, if you will, of quantum information science, right? You guys see this? So, sort of as John was implying, I mean, there's a range of ways you can play in the quantum space. With all due respect, the particle physicists get all the limelight or a lot of the press, the hype, because certainly that's the key at the core of how this technology will evolve and morph and change. But you've got this system, this again ecological framework, if you will, that's going to be required. People in these roles are going to be required to drive adoption, understanding, and then adoption of quantum technologies. Right. So strategy and consulting. I mean, there's a practice area at McKinsey and Accenture. These big consulting firms, people trying to figure out how's it going to drive business models. Investing. I think of Will Zhang, who's kind of the rock star investment quantum guy. He's the head of the quantum research practice at Goldman, right? Marketing and branding. A lot of people coming from, again, general advertising roles or technology oriented accounts moving into the quantum space. Communications and PR. Somebody's got to hype this stuff, got to explain it, got to write press releases, got to explain it to the layperson. Here's what it is, and here's the value. And sales. I mean, business development. You know, people are looking to generate attributable revenue. They're not doing this as a favor to somebody. They're like, how can we make a dollar doing this? Which is, again, an important role. UX design, how do we interact with it? How do people, users like understand this technology and poke around at it? That's a very important, you know, aspect. I remember working with user-centered design guys and gals at IBM, and it's critical. How do humans interact with technology like this? Education, obviously huge. I mean, programs at MIT, University of Chicago, David Oshalom, their names again associated with all these, and then regulatory and policy. So at the recent Inside Quantum Technology event, we had Paul DeBar speak. He's formerly the Undersecretary for Science at the Department of Energy, laying out policy for the Quantum Initiative, which is the National Quantum Initiative Act, which was signed under the last administration, allocating something like $638 million, as a starter, funding for quantum focus, quantum initiatives in the US. So anyway, that's a general sense of what this looks like, right? I'm going to stop sharing, but there's lots of different ways to play in the quantum space and contribute. And again, leveraging existing skills and figuring out what you need to know about this quantum technology, quantum information science. How does it work? What's the business benefit? Who's doing it? Where are they doing it? So that's sort of the framework, right?
I think always with these sorts of things, one of the with any sort of science and often scientists, one of the most important things is serendipity. Um, if you look sort of 7 years ago when I first started 7 or 8 years ago, first started looking into quantum and getting my brains blown out by things being in two places at once, and how different it went, unintuitive it was. But if you look at how the landscape has changed over that time, how some things like sensors and QKD are kind of there or thereabouts at the moment. They're very either they're not far from market entry. Quantum computing has come on leaps and bounds over the last 18 months. And you could still, I mean, you can still get some variation on what constitutes a quantum computer, when it'll be effective. But if you go back sort of 4 or 5 years, the view was we'll have it. It could, depending on who you listen to, it was going to be with us in 2 years or 200 years, at any stage in between that. So, as these things evolve, so I the first involvement I had was with an organisation that were looking to build a photonic quantum processor, and then that technology got superseded, or got a little bit overshadowed by annealing, spin, superconducting. And then all of a sudden, the cold atom stuff's really come to the fore, and photonics is now sort of coming back up on the outside, and potentially there'll be a lot of applications, and they'll be used in different ways. But outside of the quantum computing space, some of the applications that can be used. I saw the other day there's applications that can be used for Zoom. So you can be in multiple rooms at the same time using quantum computing systems. So there's so many different things that you could be looking at in the future that we don't know exist yet, and you could be perfect for that. And so coming back to sort of focusing on what interests you and what your strengths are, the chances are, if you're bringing something to the table, that something will come up that you may not even know exists, or may not even consider, and it could be that sort of epiphany moment. I was fortunate that I got asked to help a candidate that I knew that was a developer. Asked me to help out, finding people for this wacky technology he was building, and over the years, it's been an interesting journey, that's for sure. And I think now we're sort of coming to the stage where quantum's cool, but that hasn't always been the case, that's for sure.
I think also, so when I joined IBM in corporate internet programs, right, this is like 1998, again, when there were like 10,000 websites on the planet, I always say that, Carol Moore, the VP of the program, didn't hire me because I was cute or had a stylish shirt or a hip hairdo. She hired me because I had skills that they needed, right? That could help her achieve her objectives. And the team, there were like a dozen of us, all with different backgrounds. There's a woman who taught graphic design at NYU. There's a guy who'd been sort of a direct marketing sales guy, also a guitar player, actually. A woman who'd been a dancer and then became a film producer. But we all had skills around the web and how you deal with producing websites, and enough technology savvy to be able to provide guidance around, it's the IBM website has to run on a RISC 6000 running AIX. It can't be on a server under your desk, and it's got to look like this. To get an IBM URL, it's got to be this kind of color palette. It's got to be on strategy from a messaging perspective. And so those are the kind of skills that we all brought, this team of disparate backgrounds, to IBM's corporate internet programs. And I think you'll find the same kind of thing in the quantum marketplace as well. The other thing I would say too, especially since this is such a nascent technology, this is my advice when I do these workshops at universities, is like if the job rec typically, and this is with all due respect to John, because he's seeing this every day, but is one of two things, right? It's a description of what the person in the job did before he or she left, to some degree, and or it's a purple squirrel. Like, we need to find somebody with an ridiculous set of skills and experience. So the person has to have a PhD in particle physics, and they have to have studied medieval Irish literature at Trinity, and then they have to have worked in the Peace Corps for 5 years, and then they started their own company and exited and sold it for $5 billion to Google. It's like, well, that person doesn't exist, man. You're not going to find anybody with that skill set. So all by way of saying, if you feel like I would say 60% of the way there, especially in quantum, because it's such a new field, right? If it's 60% and it looks interesting to you, like something you might want to do, and or a company you might want to work at where the culture aligns with your values and ethics and worldview, apply for it, give it a shot. What the worst that can happen is they'll say no, but you might get on their list, right? You'll be sort of in their ecosystem, on the radar, if you will, so that when the company expands or starts a new division or initiates a new product line or gets bought by somebody or merges with somebody, you'll be sort of in their in on their radar, if you will, right? So and that's worked for me for many, many years. Worked for me at IBM several times. Like, well, you don't have the skills exactly that line up with this job rec, but you know how to do this, and we'll teach you how to do this, and then we'll get Kathy to do this other thing you don't know how to do. We'll give it, it'll be a stretch assignment. So
And I would certainly echo that. It's incredible that I think the way the market's going at the moment, there's the hiring managers that are the most successful are the ones that realise this is what I want to get to. There's not necessarily one way of getting there, and it's a competitive market. More and more people are coming out from universities, academia, or companies. The human capital is getting larger all the time. However, the requirement for the people with those skills is growing exponentially quicker. And that's not likely to equalize anytime soon. So I think that the people that will do well over the coming years are the ones that realize what what the issue they have, what the challenge they have is. There's not one solution, and how do they find the right model to provide that solution? Because going out and trying to find this mythical unicorn, it's not going to work most of the time. And it's a competitive market. There's a lot of companies out there that are phenomenal, but there's a lot of other companies also all fishing in the same pool. I was speaking to a candidate just this week actually, who, and obviously I speak directly to CEOs, hiring managers. I get them directly from their mouth what they're looking for. It's not filtered by HR. It doesn't go online, and the quite generic specs. Obviously, I look in between what they actually mean, because these are often not to rule anyone out. So I discuss at length what they actually want and go through the variables. And I'd actually misjudged something, and someone I spoke to previously is now actually potentially a good shout for a role that I had when I was speaking to them before. So don't sort of think that things are bound to be wrong, and so sometimes it's about assessing that. And as Chris said, if you're 60% the way there, that's great. And it doesn't hurt to reach out. You've got tools like LinkedIn. You can probably find someone in that area of the company, or even an internal recruiter, but ideally the line manager or technical director or whoever you may report into, and just ask them and say, I've seen this role, I like the role, I think it's a good fit. This and this is good. I wasn't certain how important this was. And you know what? You'll get credibility for reaching out to them most of the time, because you're showing skills that most candidates aren't doing. So even by asking those questions, you'll look good, even if you're not quite right. So don't be afraid to reach out. These people want to hear from you, and it may not be in my best interest to say, but sometimes if they can hear directly from someone, and they don't have to pay someone like me, it's win-win. Obviously I've got to do my job in a better way and find these things out, and kind of cut through the things and be able to give a candidate a representation they wouldn't have directly. But do you know what? If it is more important that people are finding the right roles, then I want to place everyone I speak to. But if I can give someone advice to help them find the right role, do you know what? That's a good thing as well. And the companies I hire for, they need to find good people to work for them, or else their growth stunts, and then they don't come back to me to find more roles. So it's not that kind of old school mercenary recruiter and I've seen it a lot when I worked in IT, that it's a lot, it's more common than not. I really don't think that will work in quantum, and I suspect there'll be a lot of recruiters coming into quantum with that mindset. So I often speak to candidates about what to look out for and what not to do, and why people are saying these things. So if anyone's not sure about it, come and ask me, and I'll tell them what they're doing. But on the application theme, yes, if you're a certain amount of the way, feel free to reach out to the hiring manager, or reach out to me as a sounding board, and I'll try and read between the lines for you. But don't tell most recruiters what companies you're interviewing at, because they'll try and put their candidates in front of you. So
Brother. The other thing I would say, just to follow on that, sort of meta guidance around career opportunities is applicable in the quantum space, right? So I would say things like culture and overall vibe, and trust your gut. Like, do you want to work at a big company? Do you want to work at a small company? Do you want to work at a startup? Do you want to work as a freelancer? Do you want to work as a contractor? I mean, there are all those options that exist in the normal workplace exist in the quantum space as well. So, while you may be excited about an interview or conversation you have, and John can give guidance on this as well, but it's like, what does it really look like here? So can I share my screen again? I'm going
Yeah, I think
to,
you're still good to go.
can you, yeah. So I just
Yeah,
want to
you're
give
still
you,
good to go.
a sense of, um, see if this is showing here. And these are, I have to be fair, these are from Women in Quantum. If you aren't aware of that event, you should definitely sign up. It's run by Denise Ruffner, who's VP of Business Development at IonQ. She's fantastic. She's an ex-IBMer like me, passionate about gender parity and getting women involved in this technology, right? So these are some screen grabs, many from her event. So here's career roles at IBM in quantum, right? Can you guys see this? Yes? Before I drone on. So obviously there are many technical roles, right? John, can you see it?
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good.
But so worth pointing out here where my cursor is user experience design, right? So, this is just representative. Maybe so IBM, big company, 400,000 plus people over the world, doing really interesting stuff, very smart people. Um, Here's Google, right? So Google has roles, right? And back to John's comment about sort of laser. So here's, test and measurement. So metrology, which people don't often think about maybe in the quantum space, but that's a huge, huge and important skill set that they need to make this go, right? Obviously, microwave electronics, kind of standard. So quantum, again, big, Google, big company. Um, Here is, Amazon has a facility called Bracket, right, which is they offer, pay per use quantum access to, pick your qubit. They have multiple options for running research and trying out algorithms, and again, a range of skills that they need: product managers, program managers, right? Product marketing, certainly research scientists. If you want to work at a big, complex global company, there's three right off the bat. Then there's the emerging space, right? So QC, where they need a director of product management, director of marketing. Again, this is from Women in Quantum. By the way, they do their events quarterly. I would encourage you to sign up and attend one. They did a career fair, which is where the screen grab is from, where they had, I think, 8 different companies come on and describe, what their job recs were, open opportunities. Zurich Instruments. So again, they're based in several different global locations, but they need certainly DevOps people, but technical sales, right? Someone's got to explain to the market, deal with the addressable opportunity. Here's what we have that can drive your business model, potential client, right? So anyway, so that's just, again, kind of real world. This is going on as we sit here. Quantum companies and quantum opportunities exist and are continuing to grow and morph and emerge. So it's a pretty cool time to be interested in quantum information science. Just saying.
And just to sort of further on, when you said about working out what you were interested in, that's also something when you're speaking to these companies, that will mark you out as a really good candidate if you know what you're interested in. Um, and it's one of those things. You're sitting in an interview and someone says, what are you interested in? If you haven't thought about it, you can guarantee your brain will freeze. And you'll be asked, something that should be a simple answer, but it's such a big question. Your brain will freeze, and it'll probably be trying to find out what do they want to hear. Well, what they're not after what they want to hear. They want to find out about you. And when you're working within quantum, there's so many requirements for different things, and good people are going to be. They're going to people. Companies are going to be fighting over good people. some skills are more desirable at different times. But a big thing for a company is to find out about the person behind the scientist, or a person behind the marketing guy, or whatever discipline you're in. Because the more they know about you, the more they can build the role around you, the more they can make that position fit you. By doing that, you're then someone who's not just there for 2 or 3 years. And there are companies that churn people after 2 or 3 years. Most companies want you there for 5, 7, 10, 15 years. They want to be there. When you sort of sign off for retirement, they want to keep you. If they can, it's in their best interest to do so. And the more they know about you, the closer they can come to keeping you until retirement.
Cool. So I want to share some resources, right, as we're getting to sort of the last 10 minutes. First of all, there's a site called Quantumapalooza. I don't know if you guys or gals know about that, but I'm going to put the URL in the chat. Can you guys see that? It's managed by a team, but Terrell France is the main guy. He's a professor at the University of Harrisburg, and they post all kinds of stuff, including free curriculum around quantum, events, hackathons. If you go to the site, I see they're doing a hackathon April 10th and 11th. But this is a terrific resource just to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on from an educational perspective, right, around quantum. Another URL I want to share with you is the QEDC, which is the Quantum Economic Development Consortium. It's a US-based organization. I'll put that in the chat. But it's an interesting place. Again, the other end of the spectrum. This is high-level execs from SRI, which is a consulting firm based in Palo Alto, California. But the execs here speak about quantum in various settings. I was at an event recently at the U.S. Embassy in Copenhagen, where Celia Merzbacher, who's now the executive director, Joseph Bruce, who was leading this organization, has left and now working at IBM. But this is a great resource as well. Good to check it every now and then. And my final sort of pitch is around Inside Quantum Technology, this event that John and I are going to be doing. Here's the URL for that. It's going to be virtual, but it's going to be 4 days in mid-May. And again, John and I and a couple of other esteemed colleagues are going to be running a panel on the quantum workforce. So I would encourage you to sign up and check it out. It's going to be, again, wide-ranging. So quantum computing, certainly, but quantum networking, quantum sensors, quantum cryptography. There are typically conversations around policy, around QKD, around investment, right? Where do they think there's a pony in here? Who's spending money where on what? So again, that's sort of a little sales pitch. But again, it's a terrific event with all like a modesty, even though I'm the MC. But I think it's a great place to learn about what's happening in the quantum information science space. So,
shameless pitch is welcome.
Totally. It's a cool thing. If it wasn't cool, I wouldn't be hyping it. So.
No, I'm really looking forward to it, actually. So,
yeah.
And also all of the links that Chris has just posted there, I can second all of those as well. I can vouch for those as well. So, and I think that the interesting thing is that they'll all give you a different viewpoint, a different, very interesting viewpoint on things. So to play around with, and particularly Quantumapalooza, because that will also link you onto lots of, it's kind of, you'll get into the wormhole, you'll go one way or the other, lots of things will come up, and before you realize it is Friday.
Yeah, really. Yeah. So are there any questions, or should we field questions? Or
yeah, please.
Does want to speak or type them into the chat or whatever? Happy to hear your response. I've been droning on for 45 minutes.
So I had a question. I was just curious, what made you change or be in 8 careers over these 45 years?
Well, lots of factors, right? So, what I wanted to do, how I wanted to live my life, what was important to me. A classic example is I was touring, playing with Robert Palmer and Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley and out on the road, 185 days a year. And so I came back to New York after one of these tours and said to my musician friends in New York, how do I sleep in my own bed at night? How do I get off the Holiday Inn dressing room, airport lounge circuit, And they said to a man, they said, jingles, man, you got to break into the session scene. So I was like, well, what is that? Well, we play on radio and TV commercials. The sessions are at 8 or 9 in the morning. You got to be a really good sight reader. You got to be able to play with a click track. You got to play in tune, play a lot of different styles. So I put together a list and just chased it. Called everyone I knew in the jingle biz, asked them for 3 names, called those people, took them my reel, which was a cassette at the time, introduced myself, asked them for names, went back and did it again. And finally, a producer at an ad agency in New York, Backer Spielvogel, thought I was, we hit it off and he thought I had the skills needed. And he hired me to play on some Miller Genuine Draft Beer commercials. And then I was in. But I bet it took 6 months of just schlepping and calling and hawking and taking people to lunch and inviting people to gigs. So I was still doing gigs. So, it was the meta answer is I wanted to do something different. I wanted to have a different kind of lifestyle, or other things were important to me, like not being on the road. It was fun when I was young, but like, how about,
Right.
being in my own place?
So, I mean, they've been so eclectic. I mean, how did you move from, it's not like from one music to another. It's just totally different. So,
Well, I guess this creativity and curiosity would be sort of through line themes maybe that drove me, right? So always looking to do something interesting that was creative,
I see.
and finding ways to do that.
So
So,
did you ever like settle down so did you ever finalize which one was your favorite or which one did drive you the most?
well, so people asked me that before, and I have to say, probably my favorite one was like being a touring rock musician in the 70s, right after college. I was like 22. I was in Richard Branson's studio in Oxford, England, the Manor, playing piano on a song I wrote. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool, man. And we were touring again, like, 150 to 180 days a year, opening for bands like the Eagles, ZZ Top, Fleetwood Mac, Return to Forever, Frank Zappa. I mean, it was cool. I was young, a lot of energy, writing songs, playing the bass, and so that was fun. But I mean, they've all been interesting in their own ways. I'd say probably the most challenging was IBM. And I didn't tell a lot of people at IBM that I had been a musician. I mean, it had to be the right context, the right situation, because a lot of them would say, "Well, what are you doing at IBM, man? Why are you working at IBM?" I'd
Right.
actually met the chairman once, Sam Palmisano, who was a CEO at the time, and I was introduced to him at a big exec event as the most famous musician at IBM.
Mhm.
And he actually was an alto player in high school and had played in pickup bands that would back up like Motown acts coming
Mhm.
through town. He lived in Baltimore, right? So he'd be in the section that was playing like when the Four Tops or the Temptations would do a gig in town. He was like in the horn section. So anyway, um,
So I have a last question that I will let other people ask. So
no, no,
when you said that the most challenging was IBM, what kind of challenge did you face at
well,
IBM?
so I think so several, but one is that it's a big company, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I often paraphrase Lloyd Calvin, say the sun never sets on IBM, right? So that company is in 190 countries around the world, cranking 24/7. I mean, they don't shut it down. And a typical example is when you work for IBM, you get to pick the holidays you want to take off because it's such an eclectic workforce. And we don't want to take the French Saints Day if you're working in Paris, because that's a bank holiday, or take the 4th of July if you're in the US, or if you're in India, take Diwali because that's an important holiday. And so it's like, well, you figure it out, man, because we got a company to run here and we don't have time to tell you like which holiday you think is the most important. Plus working across a matrix. So, I mean, I dealt with people, in strategy and in PR and communications to corporate headquarters. I dealt with operations people managing, server farms and data centers. I mean, all kinds of skills that you had to have some sense of being able to work across disciplines. So it was challenging. It was interesting, and I learned a ton. But it was, it was challenging, for sure.
So, like, did you feel like you weren't creative by working in IBM?
There were moments where it was not creative. I remember certainly in strategy, which is very business driven, right? So metrics driven. I worked alongside these MBAs who'd had, formal classical training in how to put together a business case. And I had never, ever done anything like that. So fortunately, I'm a good listener. But I mean, I often say I learned more in 2 days sitting next to this MBA guy, taking Excel spreadsheets and building them into charts that, conjured a strategy that we could then sell into an exec with a P&L. It's like, wow, how did you do that, man? Like, how did you make that turn into that? I mean, it
That's
was
cool.
just remarkable, what they did. But I took copious notes and asked questions and didn't ask questions when I shouldn't have, like, so it was, yeah, it was interesting. And, there were moments to be creative, but they varied. They kind of waxed and waned. So,
Thank you.
yeah,
It was awesome. Thank you,
well,
John, for having me here.
You're
thank you for
welcome. Pleasure
joining.
as always, Supriya. Does anyone else have any questions?
I have
Colin.
a question.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think you're coming.
Hi, Colin.
Hey, so I joined late. I found out from John like halfway through the meeting. I was hoping this is recorded somewhere so I can watch the first half. It was my first quick question.
Yeah, it is recorded, so you can check it out at your leisure.
Great.
Colin, I'll be posting it tomorrow through all the same channels. So just give it till sort of tomorrow, about 20 hours time. I'll have it all out.
Cool. And then the other question I had was, since this is like a new space, there's a lot of startups. Do you guys have any resources for understanding, I guess, how much equity do you expect if you join a quantum startup, and like how to evaluate which quantum startups seem like the best opportunities and most likely to succeed? Because there's going to be a lot of stuff going on.
Yes. So if I may, I'll first on this one, Chris.
Yeah.
In terms of equity and chance of success, every company thinks they're going to be the one that turns into a unicorn. So they will have material to reference that, and they want to build confidence in what they're doing. So that's something that you can have a look at. You can do all the research, but there's always an element that you need to look at the people behind it and actually know what they bring to the table. There's so much that goes into that, and also there's always a bit of chance as well. So there's obviously some that are in the news at the moment. So IonQ is going through their SPAC at the moment. I think there's a pack close behind them that are looking on with interest as to how that may go. In terms of you mentioned, so when you mention equity joining a company, you mean as in what your package would be, whether you'd get stock options, what the benefits would be like, and
Right.
so on.
Like what percentage do you expect? Because I don't know anything about that.
Again, it very much depends on the organisation. So a lot of times it's not a direct relationship, but obviously the earliest stage of companies out there will often try and load the package up with stock options to keep their fixed cost low. More mature companies, sometimes they'll go more on the benefits side, but there's not kind of a hard and fast rule. Different companies will do things differently. On top of that, probably an even bigger factor is whereabouts you're going to be located. Your cost of living, the sort of centers for different quantum initiatives, and even taking quantum computing on its own, the different epicenters for these startups, they could be in all sorts of different places. And if you're going to San Francisco, you're going to be paying a lot more money than if you're in the Midwest or something like that. So you take what's happening in New Mexico, for example, compared to San Francisco, compared to New York or London, Cambridge, different cost of living, different taxations. and it's not always the one that has the biggest salary that makes the most sense. You know, you need to break down long-term stability, the role, potential for growth. And I don't know whether you was here earlier, we focused quite a lot on knowing what's important to you, knowing yourself, what you like, what you're interested in, what's important to you. That's something that often gets underestimated. But I speak to a lot of candidates that you know, come from their PhD or postdoc. They look at the biggest salary, forget cost of living, forget all of the other things I've just mentioned. And a year or two later, they reach out to me and say, John, can you help me? It wasn't the right move. I'm now looking for something else, because they haven't done that. And, you know, it's human nature. I'm not saying that there's, you know, that I wouldn't have necessarily done it in the same situation. But it's something that does come up. So knowing yourself is a big part of what's important. It's not just the financial aspect or the entry level financial aspect. There's a lot more that goes into it than that. And you know, I'm happy to sort of go through that with anyone in a bit more detail and sort of discuss that. You know, if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'm more than happy to sort of you know, run through, act as a sounding board on that.
Yeah, sounds like it's John, a lot of factors.
I just have to jump in and share a real world story, Colin, right? So before the dot-com bust, the bubble burst in, like, you know, late 90s, I was working at IBM, and I was recruited by a bunch of different companies. I was recruited by PwC, actually, and they flew me to London, in fact, and had me take a whole battery of psychometric tests. And anyway, I got a great offer from a company in New York, Proxicom. They were basically a systems integrator posing as a sort of internet strategy company. And they offered me a 40% bump in salary, stock options, and a director title, right, to leave IBM. So I, you know, interviewed with a bunch of different companies, and their offer was the best. So I took the job. I left IBM and went there. And the first day, I knew it was a mistake. It was like, these people are a drag. There was a whole pre and post IPO mentality, like the people who'd worked at the company before the IPO and then had gotten options and made a nice taste. And then we were all the sort of, you know, the punters trying to like take advantage of the fact that they were now a public company. And the people were just, the culture was wrong. It was wrong for me. So actually I worked there for like 9 months, and then I had a friend at IBM say, would you ever think of coming back to IBM? And I'm like, yeah, in a heartbeat, man, get me out of here. So all by way of saying that the meta message for you is culture and fit and vibe, and what are the people like, and whether they're a big company or a small company. Again, even working at a company like IBM or Amazon or Google, I mean, they tend to be fiefdoms, right? They're all business units that are connected by the brand at a meta level. But I mean, Bracket is a very specific culture, I'm sure, at AWS. Every startup has its own culture driven by whoever the founder or the visionary leader is or whatever. And they can vary widely. I'm just saying. So trust your gut, right? If you go into the interview and it doesn't feel right, even if they give you a 40% bump in salary and stock options and a director title, don't do it, man. You know, go with the vibe where, like, could you see yourself spending 12 hours a day, you know, in a room or in a Zoom call with these people? You know, no matter what they're going to pay you, do it because it's interesting and a situation where you're going to learn. And again, where the people you connect with might go on to do other interesting things. You know, they might go start their own company. They might get a role at another company and bring you along with them. They might work at a business partner and do something interesting. IBM was notorious for placing execs at business partners, right, to finesse and strengthen the relationship with someone they were doing business with. So.
And just to follow on from that as well, I think that what Chris mentioned about the people, you know, you may go into a company and you're absolutely inspired by the CEO or your line manager, you know, the guy that's going to, and if that's someone that, you know, you're inspired by, you'll rise to greater heights. And as Chris said, you know, it may be that they go on to create a startup or they jump in the career, but also it'll maximize your potential to really grow. And you know, the happier you are, the better work you'll do. So I'm quite fortunate. I work with a lot of hiring managers that certainly I'd be happy to work with, and I think even from a recruiter's perspective, you tend to those sorts of people. It's nice and easy to work with them, and I produce better results for people that I respect and am able to work with, and the process works well. So I'd certainly echo those comments.
Yeah, trust your gut, net, because
Thank you.
it's just not worth working somewhere where the people are a drag, no matter what they pay you. Right? Just saying. Any other questions or comments? I know we've run a little long, but connect with me on LinkedIn. I would say that to everybody, right? I'm a big believer in LinkedIn. So I want to see connection requests from everybody in this call as soon as we end it.
And all of the links I put on LinkedIn, on the Entangles discussions page, it's got Chris's profile on there. I'll share all of these links on the follow-up. So the video and the summary will go out tomorrow for everyone. So obviously Chris's details will be on there. I think I know everyone on the call, but if not, again, please reach out to me. And I've built up a very strong network within the arena. So obviously the way LinkedIn works, if you connect with me, you get partial access to a lot of that work I've been putting in over many years. So feel free to piggyback on that work. Thanks for everyone for being here today. It's been really good speaking to you all. And Entangled Discussions, it's for you guys. We're putting this together for the quantum community to help us build something special, and you guys are an important part of that. And if what we do can help that, great. And one day I'd like you all to sort of come back as not just guests but as speakers as well. There's so many interesting stories to tell, and we're going to focus on very different monthly themes as well. So a lot of some of it will be very inclusive for everyone. Some of it will be more technical. Some of it I'll have to be researching before I do the call just to know what questions to ask. But there'll be lots of different themes, and these will range from people, still at universities, sort of CEOs and everything in between. And it's about people with interesting stories, and that's what you guys are.
Cool.
So thanks, Chris, for kicking things off for us today. It's been brilliant as always. I knew you wouldn't let us down. Thanks
My pleasure.
for joining us today. And Catherine, I just noticed you just got in, so we will be posting the video tomorrow. So don't worry about that. If you want to if you want a sneak preview, reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's always a pleasure talking. Obviously, if there's any other comments or questions that come up from this, as I think all of you know, I'm always approachable on LinkedIn or via other means. Feel free to reach out. Obviously, feel free to reach out to Chris, as he mentioned too.
Yes, please. Thank you, John, for the opportunity to share my perspective. And nice to meet you all virtually. I hope to see you at Inside Quantum Technology, where John and I will be running this great panel in May.
Yeah, pleasure all. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.